What's up, everybody? I have been messing around with the RODECaster a little bit. I was very skeptical about this piece of gear. My opinion, whenever anybody says, hey, this is like the single one size fits all, it can do everything unit for podcast recording, I'm always a little bit skeptical. So I waited. I didn't buy it for a while. I was waiting for the multi-track functionality, but I picked this up for a client recording a couple weeks ago, tested it out in a live setting in Vegas, and I've been testing it out for my own podcast recordings here in the studio, and it's really been impressing me lately. So I wanted to do a version 1, let's call this run through, because I'm still learning every single, in and out of it. There's a lot of functions in the menu, so I haven't quite got to every single thing that this RODECaster has to offer. So I'm sure I'll do a follow-up video on this in the future. But let's just run through here's what it looks like when you plug this thing in and fire it up. It turns on like this. It has a beautiful LCD display, which is freaking awesome. And then obviously the main feature of this is the different channels that you have and the different options and flexibility that you have with this. So we have 4 preamps here. Those have 4 XLR mic inputs on the back of the device. Each of these can be muted or soloed, just like you'd find on a regular mixing console. They have faders, and they also have a gain setting, which we'll get to in the menu when we get there. And then we have a couple different options here. So we have a USB input, a phone input, which is an 1/8 inch, just like you'd see like a regular aux cable. And then it's got a Bluetooth input. And then we have an 8-pad sound library here, which you can use to queue up music, background music, sound effects, jingles, things like that. And those also have mute solo functionality, and then the same faders that you would have with the mic inputs. Now, one of the biggest selling points for this thing is that it has 4 headphone amps built into the RODECaster, and these each have their own individual knobs here, so everybody can control their own headphone volume independent of the volume of each track and independent of the gain setting on each microphone, which we'll also talk about when we get to the menu. So this is, like I said, one of the biggest pieces here, because the Zoom H6 is great. I love it. I recommend it to a lot of people. Well, I did up until I found this. But the only issue with that is that you always have to have, if you have more than one person recording, you always have to have a headphone amp, or basically run without headphones, which I don't recommend. So the headphone amp is like an extra piece of gear. It can be kind of cumbersome if you're trying to travel, but with the RODECaster here, it's built in, it's easily controllable, and it works. It sounds great. The preamps on the RODECaster sound fantastic as well. Let's take a look at the back here. Scoot this thing around. So we'll start on this side. So like I said, we have 4 mic inputs here, standard XLR mic cables that you'd expect to see. Here's the 1/8 inch line for the phone slot. Now it's labeled as the phone with the icon, but you can use this for any sound source that you want. For example, right now I have this running as a line out from my computer. So I just have an 1/8 inch from my headphone jack on my computer into this. Then we have our 4 headphone jacks here. Nothing's plugged in yet. We have a monitor output here. So these are feeding into the monitors in my studio here. And that, by the way, can be controlled independently of the headphones. So a lot of the times when we're recording, I obviously don't want the monitor feeding into the room, so I have the monitor muted, but the headphones are cranked up. Then we have the micro SD slot here. We have the USB slot to run it into a computer, and this works a couple different ways. One, you can record into your computer just like this was an interface. So like I usually use Logic, so if I open Logic, I can set up the RODECaster to be the input device, and everything that's happening here on the RODECaster I can record into Logic all on separate channels. That's super convenient. Or, as we saw on the front of the device, there's a USB option on the channel strip, so you can just plug this in and feed sound in from your computer into the RODECaster. So you cannot do both simultaneously. You can't record into the computer and then get sound back to the computer through the USB. You'd have to use something different for that. That's why I have the 1/8 inch here routing my computer sound in. Then you have the power cable, self-explanatory, and the power button, also self-explanatory. There's also a headphone jack on the very front of this thing. So if you have an engineer, let's say you have 4 people on mic and 1 engineer who's running everything on the RODECaster, they can plug in their headphones here and they can get output while not affecting the 4 mics and 4 headphones that all the guests are using. Then we have the big recording button here on top. Super nice. It's lit up green when you're doing nothing, maybe doing sound check, and then lights up nice bright red when you're recording. So as I mentioned first, this thing is a nice LCD display. What you see on the front is just what you'd expect from any mixing console. So we have all of our channels, all of our faders, and you can see, I'll just cue up some music. You won't be able to hear this, but I'll crank it so you can just see the levels moving. So just like you see down below on the RODECaster, you have the 7 channels here, and then your sound bank, and then you have the main LR output, just your main left and right. And then up here at the top, just like you see on the Zoom, it tells you the capacity left on your SD card, which is always helpful. So 5.5 hours I got free. I'll probably wipe that because I already uploaded the last recording I did. And then where things really get fun, and like I said, this is just version 1 of this video. I'll probably dive into more info on the menu and everything in a different video. But if I hit the gear, we have a whole lot of options here. So the thing I'm going to talk about today is just setting this up for multi-track, which is, in my opinion, as an editor producer, is the most important thing before you start recording. And then we'll talk about channel strip settings. So first thing you want to do is go to hardware, go to advanced, and then when you first fire this thing up, you're going to want to go to the Rode website and download the firmware update for the RODECaster, as well as the RODECaster app, and make sure you update the firmware, because if you don't, then the multi-channel option is not even here. But once you get the firmware set up and you're good to go, you will see multi-channel options for recording to the SD card, which is fantastic, through USB into your computer, and then bypass audio processing, which is what I would recommend. And what that means is that all of the effects that are on board in the RODECaster, they sound great when you're recording. The gate and the compressor and everything, it works while you're recording, so you can hear that live. But what's actually being recorded to disk is bypassing all of that. So that way, if you want to mix this in post-production, all the audio is totally raw, and you can just work from scratch and process everything in post, and that's super convenient. And then for the USB channel, it has a mix minus option. So what that means is anything that's, so say you're taking a call from Zoom on your computer, Zoom or Skype, and you have that plugged in via USB, it will send an automatic mix minus back to your caller on Zoom. And if you're familiar with the mix minus setup, it's very complicated and very annoying, and this does it all just internally. So if you have a call coming through USB, you're playing music, your guest can hear the music and hear all the nice processing from your RODECaster, but then everything is coming back to them, but it's being recorded to disk without any process or anything like that. Super cool. SD card, you always want to, when you have a brand new SD card, you always want to erase it first. Every device has slightly different formatting, so when you throw in a brand new card, definitely go to the menu, definitely erase the SD card, that way it's formatted. And then the other thing that's important that we're going to talk about now is the channels. So we're going to start with just the 4 mic channels, and I'll just hit channel 1. By the way, a convenience thing, while you're screwing around with the settings on the channel, instead of having to go back through the menu, you can just queue up the different channels here. Amazing. Little things like that save you so much time, especially if you're trying to mix and adjust levels while you're live. So it has a couple automatic settings. Like for example, if you go into the microphone, if you have one of the Rode mics, you can set that, or you can choose between dynamic and condenser. I would recommend a dynamic mic if you're recording a podcast for sure, unless you're solo in a nice treated studio, then condensers are dope. And we're going to talk about the level. So gain as it relates to podcasting, this is important. And I don't have a mic plugged in right now, so you won't see this actually triggering. But what I want you to do, and this is obviously going to be different for every single mic because every mic's different, every voice is different. There are two types of volume in a mixing console like this and in audio in general. First is the gain. The gain is the amount of signal coming from the mic into the preamp, into whatever you're recording on. So when you first do a sound check, you plug your mics in. I want you to come into the menu and I want you to adjust the level here. I can turn this up or down. Get it back to 35. Adjust the gain so that your mic is sitting nicely here in this green spot. It actually gives you that green bar right there as a guide on what to shoot for. So before you even crank up the faders and turn your headphones on, you want to get used to checking the gain of each individual mic. Once that is set and it's looking good, then you come down to the actual fader, and that's where you can get different volumes for different voices. So if you're kind of quiet, you want to crank yourself up so you can hear yourself better. In relation to your co-host, maybe your co-host is super loud, so you want to crank him down a little bit. So this is affecting what you're hearing. This is the actual volume, but the gain is still the same. And remember, when we're recording to disk, everything's bypassing processing. So the levels are being recorded based off the gain setting. So you could realistically crank your faders all the way down and record, and you're still getting signal from your mic. You're just not hearing it come through the output of the board. So I hope that makes sense. The gain versus volume is always a little confusing. Also, phantom power here. You want to be careful because some mics do require phantom power. I would say 9 times out of 10, if you plug a mic in and you turn the gain up and you're not seeing any signal come through, it's because it needs phantom power. So if you're using a dynamic, usually you don't have to worry about that. It's mostly for condenser mics. So I'd go through and double check the gain levels and everything for each mic channel. And then if you go into advanced, there's also a couple onboard effects that you can enable. So again, like I said, this is getting bypassed when you record to disk. So for example, if I'm recording my show live, then I like to have the compressor and the gate and all these things on while we're doing the recording, because it's super nice to have that processing live. Because, you know, if we're in a room with a fan or something, say there's a slight fan noise, then the gate will take care of that. The compressor will help balance our levels out between each individual voice. The de-esser will cut down on S's, all that kind of stuff that you would want to do in post. It's always nice to have that live. It's very convenient. So I turn on everything except for the ducking for two reasons. One, the ducking is only available on channel 1. I don't know why that is. And ducking, by the way, is, let's say you're playing music from the soundboard, ducking will automatically lower the level of the music in relation to channel 1 here. So whenever you're talking, the RODECaster will try to lower the music a little bit to balance it out and make sure your voice doesn't get buried. So ducking is one word for this. In post, we usually do sidechain compression. They do the same function. I usually turn it off, again, because it's only on one channel, so I don't know why you would want it on mic 1 and not everything else. Oral exciter is just like a little bit of boost on the high end. It gives you like a nice presence. Big bottom, self-explanatory, that's boost on the bass end. That one I would say kind of depends on the voice. If you have a boomy voice, you might not need it. And then you can also set different tone and strength of your voice, and the RODECaster will try to adapt to that. So I usually just leave this medium and medium for both. Again, I want the processing a little bit while I'm live, but I do most things in post, so I usually don't screw around with that very often. So that's it for today. We're gonna touch more on this in a future video once I've gone through and, you know, really tore this thing apart and checked every single little setting that we have in there. The only other thing I would note before you get rolling on this is if you want a second recording option, like say you want to do a backup, there's a couple ways to do that. I tested this out and I ran the USB cable and I used an Apple Lightning to USB converter. And I plugged that into my iPhone. I tested it with the iPhone and an iPad. And what that's going to do is send a stereo signal of everything from the RODECaster into your device. And then I just record on that device for a nice backup. So it's stereo and it's going to have everything that you hear live. So if you are adjusting faders, that's going to be in that cut tape. And then if you're playing music or anything, that's all going to be in there. But it's nice to just have a backup option just in case anything goes wrong. What you can do with that as well is, instead of running a backup, what I do is I run that into my iPhone or iPad, and then I fire up Castbox, which has a live stream functionality for audio, or maybe I'll fire up Instagram Live or something, and then I'm feeding the sound source from the RODECaster with all these nice faders and volume levels and processing and background music and everything. I'm feeding all that as a stereo signal into my phone. So if you want to do Instagram Live and you have the RODECaster, you can just fire up your iPhone, turn the camera on, and then just plug this thing in, and then you're going to get really nice, crisp and clean audio. You don't have to worry about, the big boomy sound that you have with an iPhone mic when you're in a room, square room, if it's not treated and all that stuff. So there's a couple options there. You can just record a video with it. You can record the audio as just a single backup. You can go live on YouTube with that audio if you want. You can do Instagram, Facebook. Pretty open options there. There's also another thing that you can do. So if you don't have speakers and you're not going to be using the monitor output, you can also get a cable that will take the left and right from your monitor output, and maybe it goes into a single 1/8 inch that's going into a phone, like an Android device, or maybe it goes into an XLR cable that you can connect into like your Zoom H6 or something, and you can do a backup there as well. So you can do, again, a backup or record it and use another app taking all the sound coming from the RODECaster, which is really dope. And then the third option is, if you don't need this extra headphone jack on the front, you can do the same thing there. You can just run an 1/8 inch out into the Zoom H6, record a backup there, and or connect that to your phone and use that for a streaming service. So there's a lot of functionality with this thing. I'm really impressed that I can have 4 mics, I can take in a remote call, I can feed in sound from my computer if we're like watching clips or something, I can connect to Bluetooth, I can queue up sounds and music and background music and jingles all from here, and I can realistically have my 4 headphones. I can send it out into a backup recording. I can also send it out in real time to a live streaming app, and that's all done on this one device. And it's a $600 price tag, but like I said, if you get a Zoom H6 and then you also need a headphone amp and you need a couple other accessories to really make that thing work, this is all in one. And now that they've added multi-track recording, I'm really impressed. So thanks for watching, guys. I will try to get into the rest of the details on this RODECaster and fire off another video in a couple weeks once I have a handle on more of the advanced settings. So thanks for watching.